Welcome to No Sleep Historian, where the past never rests, and neither can you. Cursed artifacts, objects that should have stayed buried. Throughout history, humanity has unearthed, built, and stolen things it should have left alone. Objects that came with legacies of madness, death, disappearance, and paranoia. Some were hidden again. Others still sit behind museum glass, if you believe the stories. This isn't myth. These are well-documented cases with real witnesses, real corpses, and real warnings. What you're about to hear may sound like folklore until the body count starts. Part 1. The Bassano Vase, Italy's wedding gift of death. In the rolling hills of northern Italy, near the ancient city of Napoli, stands a legend that has haunted collectors and historians for over 5 centuries. The Bassano Vase, named after the family that first owned it, represents one of the most documented cases of a cursed object in European history. This ornate 15th century silver vase, standing approximately 18 inches tall and decorated with intricate Renaissance-era engravings, was crafted during the height of Italian artistry, when master silversmiths commanded respect across the known world. The vase's dark history begins in 1487 with a young bride from the wealthy Bassano family. According to parish records from the Church of San Domenico, the vase was presented as a wedding gift to celebrate her marriage to a prominent Venetian merchant. The celebrations were elaborate, befitting the union of 2 powerful trading families. However, the joy was short-lived. On her wedding night, the bride was found dead in her bridal chamber, clutching the vase to her chest. The circumstances were mysterious, with no signs of violence or illness. The local physician could only describe her expression as one of absolute terror. The vase passed to her younger sister, who inherited it along with the family's other treasures. Within months, she too was found dead under similarly inexplicable circumstances. This pattern continued through several generations of the Bassano family. Each owner met an untimely and mysterious end, often within a year of taking possession of the vase. By the early 1600s, the surviving family members were so terrified that they sealed the vase in a wooden crate and buried it in an unmarked location on their estate. For nearly 4 centuries, the vase remained lost to history. Local folklore kept the story alive in whispered tales told around fireplace hearths, but most scholars dismissed it as medieval superstition. That changed dramatically in 1988 when construction workers renovating an old villa outside Naples discovered a wooden crate beneath the foundation. Inside, wrapped in rotting silk, was the Bassano vase, its silver surface tarnished black with age, but its intricate engravings still clearly visible. The construction foreman, Giuseppe Torino, took the vase home, planning to have it appraised. Within 3 days, he suffered a massive heart attack at the age of 37, despite having no history of heart problems. His widow, Maria, initially kept the vase, but began experiencing vivid nightmares and a persistent feeling of being watched. When her own health began to deteriorate rapidly, she sold it to a local antique dealer named Carlo Benedetti. Benedetti displayed the vase prominently in his shop window, where it attracted considerable attention from tourists and collectors. However, his excitement was short-lived. Within 2 months, his business began to fail mysteriously. Longtime customers stopped visiting, claiming they felt uneasy in the shop. Benedetti himself developed severe insomnia and reported hearing whispers in the night. His family physician, Dr. Alessandro Marino, documented these symptoms in medical records that still exist today. The situation escalated when Benedetti's teenage son began sleepwalking, always ending up in the shop staring at the vase. On one occasion, neighbors found the boy standing in front of the display window at 3 in the morning, completely unresponsive, desperate to rid himself of what he now believed was a cursed object. Benedetti contacted several museums and private collectors. The first potential buyer was Dr. Elena Rossi, a professor of Renaissance art at the University of Bologna. She drove to Naples specifically to examine the vase, bringing along authentication equipment and historical documentation. Dr. Rossi spent several hours photographing and cataloging the piece, noting its exceptional craftsmanship and potential historical significance. However, on her drive back to Bologna, her car inexplicably veered off the autostrada at high speed. The accident investigation found no mechanical failures, no evidence of other vehicles, and no explanation for why an experienced driver would suddenly lose control on a straight stretch of road. The second buyer was Thomas Wright, a British antique collector known for his interest in unusual historical pieces. Wright purchased the vase sight unseen based on photographs and had it shipped to his estate in the Cotswolds. He immediately began experiencing the same symptoms reported by previous owners, including severe nightmares, unexplained illnesses, and a growing sense of dread. Wright's housekeeper, Mrs. Margaret Thompson, later testified that she often found him talking to the vase as if someone were inside it. Wright's situation deteriorated rapidly. His longtime business partners began avoiding him, claiming his personality had changed dramatically. He became increasingly paranoid and reclusive, rarely leaving his estate. Local villagers reported seeing lights moving through his house at all hours of the night. Wright's neighbor, retired physician Dr. James Morrison, became concerned enough to check on him regularly. During one visit, Dr. Morrison found Wright in a catatonic state, staring at the vase with tears streaming down his face. The final documented owner before the vase's disappearance was Marco Benedetti, no relation to the antique dealer, who purchased it from Wright's estate after Wright's death from what the coroner ruled as natural causes, though the man was only 42 years old. Marco, a wealthy industrialist from Milan, initially dismissed the stories surrounding the vase as superstition. He placed it in his private collection room alongside other historical artifacts. Marco's experience with the vase was perhaps the most thoroughly documented. His personal secretary, Anna Lombardi, kept detailed records of the strange events that began almost immediately after the vase arrived at his villa. These records, which were later provided to investigators, paint a disturbing picture of escalating supernatural activity. Servants reported hearing crying sounds emanating from the collection room. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned whenever they were pointed toward the vase's display case. Marco himself began to change dramatically. According to Ms. Lombardi's notes, he became obsessed with researching the vase's history, spending entire nights in libraries and archives. He hired genealogists to trace the Bassano family lineage and even attempted to contact living descendants. His health deteriorated visibly, and he lost considerable weight. Family photographs from this period show a gaunt, hollow-eyed man who bore little resemblance to the robust businessman he had been just months earlier. The situation reached its climax when Marco's wife, Isabella, reported finding him in the collection room at dawn, unconscious on the floor beside the vase. He had no memory of how he got there and claimed the last thing he remembered was going to bed. This incident repeated several times over the following weeks, Despite Isabella's attempts to lock the collection room, growing increasingly desperate, Marco contacted the Catholic Church, requesting that a priest bless his home and the vase specifically. Father Giuseppe Martinelli agreed to perform the blessing, but reported afterward that he had never experienced anything like it. According to Father Martinelli's written account, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically when he approached the vase, and he heard what he described as the sound of weeping echoing from within the silver itself. Marco's death came suddenly and without warning. He was found in his study, apparently having died peacefully in his sleep, but his face bore the same expression of terror that had been reported in connection with the vase's previous victims. Isabella immediately contacted the police, not to report a crime, but to beg them to remove the vase from her home. The final chapter of the Bassano vase's known history involves the Italian Carabinieri, who took possession of the artifact as part of their investigation into the series of deaths. However, even the police were not immune to its influence. Officer Luigi Romano, who was assigned to catalog the evidence, began experiencing nightmares and panic attacks. When two more officers reported similar symptoms after handling the vase, their commanding officer, Captain Francesco Alberti, made an unprecedented decision. Rather than store the vase in the evidence locker, Captain Alberti ordered it to be buried in an unmarked grave in a secret location known only to a few senior officers. This decision was never officially documented, and Captain Alberti took the location secret to his grave when he died of natural causes in 2003. Despite numerous attempts by collectors, historians, and curiosity seekers to locate the vase, it has never been found. The story of the Bassano vase raises disturbing questions about the nature of cursed objects and whether some things truly are better left buried. The documented evidence, spanning over 5 centuries, suggests that this is more than mere coincidence or superstition. Medical records, police reports, and eyewitness testimonies all point to a pattern of tragedy that defies rational explanation. Part 2. The Crying Boy Paintings. Fires that left only one thing unburned. In the summer of 1985, Britain was gripped by one of the most bizarre and unsettling mysteries in modern paranormal history. It began with a routine house fire investigation in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, but would eventually encompass hundreds of similar incidents across the United Kingdom, baffling fire investigators, terrifying homeowners, and creating a media sensation that persists to this day. The first documented case involved the home of Ron and May Hall, a retired couple who had lived quietly in their terraced house for over 30 years. On the morning of September 4th, neighbors called the fire brigade after seeing smoke pouring from the Hall's kitchen window. When firefighters arrived, they found a scene of complete devastation. The kitchen had been gutted by flames. The living room was severely damaged by smoke and heat, and most of the couple's possessions had been destroyed or rendered unsalvageable. However, amid the charred wreckage, Senior Fire Officer Peter Jenkins made a discovery that would haunt him for years to come. Hanging undamaged on the soot-blackened wall was a mass-produced print of a painting depicting a young boy with tears streaming down his face. The print, approximately 24 inches by 18 inches and framed in cheap wood, showed no signs of fire damage whatsoever. Even more remarkably, the wall behind it was severely scorched, suggesting that the flames had somehow burned around the painting while leaving it completely untouched. Officer Jenkins had seen thousands of house fires during his 20-year career, But nothing had prepared him for this anomaly. In his official report, he noted that while artwork occasionally survived fires when protected by glass or positioned away from the main fire source, this painting had been hanging directly in the path of the flames. The glass covering was intact, but not even cracked from the intense heat that had destroyed everything else in its immediate vicinity. The halls themselves had perished in the fire, making it impossible to determine how the blaze had started. The investigation concluded that it was likely caused by an electrical fault in the kitchen, a common enough occurrence that would normally have closed the case. However, Officer Jenkins couldn't stop thinking about the undamaged painting, and he began asking colleagues if they had encountered similar situations. To his surprise, several firefighters reported nearly identical experiences. Over the following weeks, as Jenkins reached out to fire stations across Yorkshire and beyond, a disturbing pattern emerged. The same image of the crying boy had been found undamaged in dozens of house fires stretching back several years. In every case, the painting had survived, while everything around it was destroyed. The phenomenon gained widespread public attention when journalist Kelvin Mackenzie of the Sun newspaper learned of Jenkins' unofficial investigation. On October 4, 1985, the Sun published a front-page story under the headline "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." The article described multiple fire incidents where the painting had survived unscathed and suggested that the image itself might be cursed. The response from readers was immediate and overwhelming. Within days of the article's publication, the Sun's offices were flooded with letters and phone calls from people reporting similar experiences. Margaret Thompson from Leeds wrote that she had owned one of the paintings for 3 years before her house burned down, killing her elderly mother. The painting was found hanging perfectly intact in the room where her mother had died. James Mitchell from Glasgow reported that his flat had been destroyed in a fire just 6 months after his girlfriend had bought the painting at a charity shop. Like the others, the painting showed no signs of damage. The stories kept coming. Mary O'Brien from Liverpool described how her kitchen fire had destroyed everything except the crying boy painting, which she found just hanging there like nothing had happened. David Walsh from Birmingham reported that, after his house fire, insurance investigators specifically photographed the undamaged painting because they had never seen anything like it. These weren't isolated incidents or cases of mass hysteria. These were documented fires with official reports, insurance claims, and multiple witnesses. Fire investigators across the country began to take notice. Chief Fire Officer Michael Harrison of the West Yorkshire Fire Service acknowledged publicly that his department had encountered the phenomenon multiple times. In an interview with BBC Radio Leeds, Harrison stated that while he couldn't explain how the paintings survived the fires, the pattern was too consistent to ignore. He noted that his officers had begun to specifically look for and photograph the undamaged crying boy paintings when investigating house fires. The paintings themselves were mass-produced prints of an original work created in the 1950s by Spanish artist Giovanni Braglin, whose real name was Bruno Amadeo. The original painting, titled Il Bambino Che Piange, depicted a young boy with distinctive tear-stained cheeks and an expression of deep sadness. Bragelin had created a series of similar paintings featuring crying children, but this particular image had been reproduced thousands of times and sold in department stores, charity shops, and markets throughout Britain during the 1970s and early 1980s. The identity of the boy in the painting became a subject of intense speculation and investigation. Some claimed he was a street orphan whom Bragglin had encountered in post-war Europe. Others suggested he was the artist's own son or a child from a local orphanage. More disturbing theories emerged, suggesting that the boy himself had died in a fire, and his spirit was somehow trapped within the painting. However, despite extensive research by journalists and paranormal investigators, the boy's true identity was never conclusively established. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a parapsychologist at the University of Edinburgh, became interested in the phenomenon and began conducting her own investigation. She tracked down several of the original fire victims and their families, conducting interviews and examining the surviving paintings. Dr. Mitchell's research, published in the Journal of Paranormal Studies in 1987, documented over 200 cases where crying boy paintings had survived house fires across Britain. Her findings were remarkable for their consistency. In every documented case, the painting had been the only item in its immediate vicinity to survive the fire. Glass windows had shattered, wooden furniture had been reduced to ash, and metal objects had been warped by heat, but the paintings remained pristine. Even more intriguingly, Dr. Mitchell found that in many cases, the fires had started in rooms adjacent to where the paintings were hanging, as if the fires were somehow drawn to them. The psychological impact on the survivors was equally disturbing. Many reported feeling uncomfortable around the painting even before the fire, describing sensations of being watched or hearing crying sounds at night. Mrs. Eleanor Davies from Cardiff told Dr. Mitchell that she had tried to remove the painting from her bedroom wall multiple times, but kept finding it back in its original position the next morning. She had assumed her husband was moving it back as a joke until the night she woke to find him standing motionless in front of the painting, tears streaming down his face, with no memory of how he got there. The media attention surrounding the crying boy paintings led to widespread panic among owners. The Sun newspaper organized what it called Crying Boy Bonfires, encouraging readers to bring their paintings to designated locations where they would be safely destroyed. Hundreds of people participated, creating massive pyres of the supposedly cursed artwork. However, even these public burnings produced strange reports. Several witnesses claimed that the paintings were extremely difficult to ignite, and that when they finally caught fire, they produced an unusual blue flame and the smell of sulfur. Professional fire investigators remained divided on the phenomenon. Some suggested that the paintings might have been treated with fire-retardant chemicals during the mass production process, though no evidence of such treatment was ever found. Others proposed that the positioning of the paintings on walls might have created air currents that protected them from direct flame contact. However, these theories failed to explain why other wall-mounted objects in the same rooms were consistently destroyed. The Royal Institution of Fire Engineers commissioned a study led by Dr. William J. Henderson to investigate the phenomenon scientifically. Dr. Henderson's team conducted controlled burns using identical crying boy paintings and various fire scenarios. Their results, published in 1987, were inconclusive but disturbing. While they could not reproduce the phenomenon under laboratory conditions, they noted several anomalies during their testing. Paintings that should have been completely destroyed showed minimal damage, and temperature readings around the artworks were consistently lower than in surrounding areas. Perhaps most unsettling was Dr. Henderson's personal experience during the testing. In his private notes, which were not included in the official report, but were later obtained by journalist Amanda Clark. Henderson described feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread whenever he handled the paintings. He wrote about hearing what sounded like a child crying during several of the test burns, though no recording equipment detected any unusual sounds. The phenomenon began to spread beyond Britain's borders as international media picked up the story. Reports emerged from Ireland, Australia, and even parts of the United States where British expatriates had brought the paintings with them. In each case, the pattern remained the same: house fires that destroyed everything except the crying boy painting. The consistency of these reports across different countries and cultures suggested that whatever was happening was not limited to a specific geographic location or cultural belief system. By 1988, the initial media frenzy had begun to die down, but the mystery remained unsolved. Dr. Mitchell continued her research well into the 1990s, eventually documenting over 400 cases of crying boy paintings surviving fires. Her final report, published shortly before her death in 2001, concluded that while no scientific explanation could account for the phenomenon, the evidence was too substantial to dismiss as coincidence or mass hysteria. Today, crying boy paintings still occasionally surface at car boot sales and charity shops, though most are quickly removed when their history is discovered. Fire investigators across Britain continue to encounter the phenomenon, though it receives far less media attention than it did in the 1980s. The surviving paintings are treated with a mixture of scientific curiosity and superstitious dread, objects that challenge our understanding of the physical world and suggest that some mysteries may be beyond human comprehension. Part 3. The Dybbuk Box, the wine cabinet that screamed. In the seemingly ordinary suburban landscape of Portland, Oregon, a simple estate sale in 2001 would give birth to one of the most documented and terrifying cases of supernatural possession in modern American history. The object at the center of this nightmare was an unremarkable wooden wine cabinet, approximately 2 feet tall, with simple brass hinges and a weathered finish that spoke of decades of use. Yet, this innocent-looking piece of furniture would soon become known worldwide as the Dybbuk Box, an artifact so malevolent that its very presence could destroy lives, shatter families, and challenge the fundamental beliefs of even the most skeptical observers. The story begins with Kevin Mannis, a successful antique dealer and furniture restorer who had built a reputation over 15 years for finding hidden treasures at estate sales across the Pacific Northwest. On September 13, 2001, Mannis arrived at a modest ranch house in southeast Portland, where the belongings of recently deceased 103-year-old Holocaust survivor Havila were being sold by her granddaughter. The elderly woman had lived alone for decades, and her possessions reflected a life of careful preservation and quiet dignity. Among the furniture and household items, Mannis noticed the small wooden cabinet sitting inconspicuously on a side table. Its craftsmanship was solid, if unremarkable, the type of piece that might have been made in Eastern Europe in the early 20th century. When Mannis inquired about purchasing it, the granddaughter's reaction was immediate and disturbing. Her face went pale, and she adamantly refused to sell it, stating that her grandmother had warned her never to open it and that it should remain in the family. However, financial pressures and the practicalities of settling an estate eventually overcame her reservations. After considerable negotiation and multiple warnings about never opening the cabinet, she reluctantly agreed to sell it to Mannis for $45 as he loaded it into his truck. She told him that her grandmother had acquired the cabinet in Spain after fleeing the Holocaust, and had spoken of it with fear and reverence throughout her life. The old woman had claimed it contained a Dybbuk, a malevolent spirit from Jewish folklore that attaches itself to objects and torments the living. Manus initially dismissed the story as old-world superstition, but his attitude changed rapidly after bringing the cabinet to his antique shop. Within hours of its arrival, his employee Jane began complaining of a terrible smell emanating from the storage room where the cabinet was kept. She described it as the odor of cat urine mixed with jasmine flowers, a combination so unpleasant that customers began commenting on it. More disturbing were Jane's reports of hearing someone crying in the storage room when she was alone in the shop. The first major incident occurred 3 days after the cabinet's arrival. Manus had left Jane to close the shop while he attended an auction. When he returned the next morning, he found the front door unlocked, the lights on, and Jane's car still in the parking lot. Inside, he discovered Jane unconscious on the floor near the storage room, her hair completely white. When she regained consciousness, Jane had no memory of the previous evening after 6 p.m. More troubling, she had aged visibly overnight, appearing years older than she had just the day before. Jane quit immediately, refusing to explain what had happened and declining to return even to collect her final paycheck. Her transformation was so dramatic that regular customers who knew her failed to recognize her when they encountered her around town. Dr. Sarah Goldman, Jane's longtime physician, documented the sudden onset of premature aging and memory loss, but could find no medical explanation for the dramatic changes in her patient's condition. Disturbed by Jane's experience, but still skeptical about supernatural explanations, Manus decided to examine the cabinet more closely. When he finally opened it, he discovered a collection of objects that seemed to tell a story of profound suffering and loss. Inside were 2 1920s pennies, a lock of blonde hair bound with a black ribbon, a small granite slab with the Hebrew word shalom carved into it, a dried rosebud, a golden wine goblet, and most unsettling of all, a wooden figurine of a woman with her arms stretched upward, as if in supplication or terror. The moment Manus opened the cabinet, he was overwhelmed by the same putrid smell Jane had described, but intensified to the point of causing physical nausea. More disturbing was his immediate sense that he was being watched by something malevolent and ancient. That night, he experienced the first of what would become recurring nightmares, featuring an elderly woman with wild gray hair and glowing red eyes who would claw at him while speaking in a language he didn't understand but somehow knew was filled with curses and threats. Hoping to understand more about the cabinet's history, Manus contacted Rabbi David Cohen of Portland's congregation, Beth Israel. Rabbi Cohen examined the objects and identified several as items commonly associated with Jewish mystical practices, particularly those related to containing or communicating with spirits. The Hebrew inscription, the wine goblet, and the positioning of the objects suggested that someone had attempted to trap a Dybbuk within the cabinet using traditional Kabbalistic methods. Rabbi Cohen's research into the cabinet's possible origins led him to connect with Holocaust memorial organizations and genealogical societies. Through these channels, he learned more about Havilah's background. Born in Poland in 1898, she had been a practitioner of Kabbalah who had fled to Spain. During the early years of World War II, survivors from her community remembered her as a woman of unusual spiritual gifts who had been consulted by many for protection against evil spirits and curses. According to testimonies collected by the USC Shoah Foundation, Havilah had acquired the cabinet in 1938 from another Jewish refugee who was dying and claimed to have trapped a Dybbuk that had been tormenting her family for generations. The refugee woman had begged Havilah to take responsibility for containing the spirit, warning that if the cabinet were ever opened or destroyed, the Dybbuk would be free to attach itself to whoever had disturbed its prison. Meanwhile, Manas's life was deteriorating rapidly. His business began to fail as customers complained about the oppressive atmosphere in his shop. Personal relationships crumbled as friends and family members reported feeling uncomfortable in his presence. Most disturbing were the physical manifestations that began occurring around the cabinet. Manas documented strange odors, sudden temperature drops, and the sound of footsteps in empty rooms. Security cameras captured inexplicable shadows moving across walls, and electronic equipment malfunctioned whenever it was near the cabinet. Desperate to rid himself of what he now believed was a genuinely cursed object, Manas first tried to return the cabinet to Havilah's granddaughter. However, when he contacted her, he learned that she had died just weeks after the estate sale in a car accident that investigators could not explain. Her family refused to have anything to do with the cabinet and threatened legal action if Manas attempted to bring it near them. Manas then decided to give the cabinet away, first offering it to his mother as a birthday gift. Within 24 hours of receiving it, his previously healthy 80-year-old mother suffered a massive stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak. When Manas visited her in the hospital, she managed to scrawl a single word on a piece of paper, hate, before pointing at the cabinet he had foolishly brought with him. Her doctors could find no medical reason for the stroke, and her recovery was complicated by what nurses described as an unusual level of agitation and fear. Retrieving the cabinet from his mother's house, Manas next gave it to his sister, carefully omitting its disturbing history. Within days, she reported that her teenage children were experiencing severe nightmares and refusing to go to their bedrooms. Her husband, a traditionally skeptical engineer, began having panic attacks and was unable to enter the room where the cabinet was stored. After her daughter was found one morning with mysterious scratches covering her arms and no memory of how they had occurred, Manas's sister demanded that he remove the cabinet immediately. The pattern continued with every subsequent owner. Manas gave the cabinet to friends, business associates, and even strangers, but in each case, it was returned within days or weeks, accompanied by stories of nightmares, unexplained injuries, financial ruin, and relationship breakdowns. One recipient, a local college professor named Dr. Michael Stevens, attempted to study the cabinet scientifically. He set up recording equipment and documented numerous anomalous readings, including electromagnetic fluctuations and temperature variations that seemed to follow no natural pattern. Dr. Stevens's academic interest turned to terror when he began experiencing what he described as presence manifestations in his home. He reported feeling something touching him when no one was there, hearing his name called by voices he didn't recognize, and finding objects moved from their original positions. Most disturbing was his discovery of words written on fogged bathroom mirrors in what appeared to be an ancient form of Hebrew. When he consulted with religious scholars, they identified the words as curses related to binding souls and preventing them from finding peace. The breaking point for Dr. Stevens came when his young nephew, who was visiting for a weekend, claimed to have seen the angry lady standing next to his bed. The child described an elderly woman in tattered clothing who spoke in a foreign language and seemed to be crying. When Dr. Stevens asked the boy to draw what he had seen, the resulting sketch bore a disturbing resemblance to descriptions of Dibbuks found in traditional Jewish folklore, figures of tormented spirits seeking to possess the living. By 2003, Manis had exhausted his options for giving away the cabinet. Everyone who had received it had returned it, and word of its malevolent nature had spread throughout Portland's antique and collector communities, facing mounting financial problems, deteriorating health, and the complete breakdown of his personal relationships. Manis made the decision to sell the cabinet on eBay, fully disclosing its history and the experiences of its various owners. The eBay listing, posted in February 2004, was unlike anything the platform had seen before. Manis provided detailed documentation of every supernatural occurrence associated with the cabinet, including photographs, medical records, and sworn statements from witnesses. He warned potential buyers about the object's malevolent nature and explicitly stated that he was selling it to transfer the curse to someone else, not because he doubted its reality. Despite the dire warnings, the auction attracted intense interest from collectors of paranormal artifacts, researchers studying supernatural phenomena, and individuals who believed they could cleanse or contain the Dybbuk. The bidding was fierce, with the final sale price reaching $1,775. The winning bidder was Iosif Nitsky, a university museum curator from Missouri who specialized in artifacts related to religious and cultural history. Nitsky's experience with the cabinet would prove even more dramatic and well-documented than Manis's ordeal. Within days of the cabinet's arrival at his home, Nitsky began experiencing intense nightmares featuring the same elderly woman that previous owners had described. However, unlike others, Nitsky was able to communicate with the entity, engaging in conversations conducted in a mixture of English and what he later identified as medieval Polish. Through these terrifying nocturnal encounters, Nitsky learned more about the Dybbuk's history. The spirit identified herself as having been trapped in the cabinet since 1938 and spoke of her desperate desire to find peace through proper burial and religious rites. She described her previous life as a young woman who had been murdered during a pogrom in Eastern Europe and whose soul had been unable to move on due to the violent and unjust nature of her death. Nitsky's attempts to help the spirit find peace led him to consult with Rabbi Isaac Goldhirsch, one of the country's leading experts on Jewish mysticism and the treatment of supernatural phenomena according to religious law. Rabbi Goldhirsch examined the cabinet and confirmed that it showed signs of having been used in a traditional Dybbuk binding ritual. He explained that such practices were sometimes employed as a last resort when a malevolent spirit could not be exorcised through conventional means. The rabbi's investigation revealed that the cabinet had indeed been crafted specifically for containing spiritual entities. The wood had been treated with blessed oils. The interior had been inscribed with protective Hebrew prayers, and the objects inside had been arranged according to ancient Kabbalistic traditions. However, Rabbi Goldhirsch also discovered that the binding ritual had been performed incorrectly, leaving the Dybbuk partially contained but still able to influence the physical world and torment those who came into contact with its prison. Working together, Nitsky and Rabbi Goldhirsch attempted to perform a proper cleansing and release ritual. However, their efforts were met with violent supernatural resistance. During the ceremony, both men were physically attacked by invisible forces, suffering scratches and bruises that appeared spontaneously. The cabinet itself exhibited signs of extreme agitation, with its doors slamming open and shut repeatedly, while the objects inside moved on their own. The ritual's failure convinced both men that the Dybbuk was too powerful and too angry to be released safely. Instead, they decided to reinforce the existing binding and ensure that the cabinet would never again be opened or disturbed. Using additional protective measures and more precise Hebrew inscriptions, they sealed the cabinet more securely than before and placed it in a location where it would be protected from curious hands. However, the story of the Dybbuk box was far from over. In subsequent years, the cabinet changed hands several more times, always bringing tragedy and terror to its new owners. Each transfer was documented online, creating a growing digital record of supernatural encounters that attracted worldwide attention. The cabinet's reputation spread beyond the collector community, inspiring books, documentaries, and eventually a major motion picture. Part 4. The Delhi Purple Sapphire, the gem that brought misery from a stolen temple. Deep within the archives of the Natural History Museum in London lies one of the most thoroughly documented cursed objects in existence. The Delhi Purple Sapphire, despite its name, is actually a 312-carat amethyst that has been linked to a century-long trail of suicides, financial ruin, and mysterious deaths. Its dark history begins not in the sterile display cases of a museum, but in the sacred temples of India during the height of British colonial rule, when cultural treasures were routinely plundered in the name of empire. The gemstone's journey into the Western world began in 1857 during the Indian Rebellion, when British forces under Colonel W. Ferris stormed the Temple of Indra in Kanpur, now known as Kanpur. The temple, dedicated to the Hindu god of storms and warfare, had stood for over 800 years as a center of worship and pilgrimage. According to surviving British military records and testimonies from Indian witnesses, the temple's priests had warned the invading soldiers that removing certain sacred objects would bring divine retribution upon anyone who possessed them. Colonel Ferris, a pragmatic military man with little patience for what he considered local superstition, ordered his men to strip the temple of its valuable artifacts. Among the treasures looted that day was an enormous amethyst that had been set into the forehead of a statue of Indra, the priests. Anguished cries as the stone was pried from its sacred setting were described by several British soldiers as the sound of souls being torn from their bodies. These accounts, found in personal letters sent home to England, provide chilling testimony to the cultural and spiritual violation that occurred that day. The gemstone, along with other plundered artifacts, was shipped to England, where it entered the private collection of Colonel Ferris. However, the colonial officer's triumph was short-lived. Within 6 months of returning to England, Ferris began experiencing a series of personal and financial disasters that would ultimately destroy his life and reputation. His investments failed catastrophically, his wife left him, and his military career ended in disgrace when he was court-martialed for conduct unbecoming an officer. Most disturbing were the psychological changes that Ferris's friends and family observed in him after his return from India. Captain James Whitmore, Ferris's longtime friend and fellow officer, documented these changes in his personal diary, which was later donated to the Imperial War Museum. According to Whitmore's entries, Ferris became increasingly obsessed with the amethyst, spending hours staring at it and claiming to hear voices speaking in what he believed was Sanskrit. Ferris's behavior became so erratic that his servants began refusing to enter the room where the stone was kept. The situation reached its tragic conclusion in December 1858 when Colonel Ferris was found dead in his study, apparently having taken his own life. The coroner's report noted that Ferris had been clutching the amethyst when his body was discovered, and that his final letter spoke of being tormented by the vengeful spirits of a violated temple. The suicide shocked London society, as Ferris had shown no previous signs of mental illness and had been regarded as a stable and rational man. The gemstone passed to Ferris's estate and was eventually acquired by Edward Herenallon, a respected Victorian gentleman, scientist, author, and collector of curiosities. Herenallon, born in 1861, was a man of multiple talents and interests. Known for his work in marine biology, his translations of Persian poetry, and his extensive collection of unusual artifacts from around the world. Initially, he was intrigued rather than concerned by the stone. The effects of this exposure were immediate and dramatic. 3 of the 4 workers involved in the relocation suffered severe accidents within 24 hours. One fell down a flight of stairs, despite being an experienced climber. Another was struck by a delivery truck while crossing a street he had safely navigated thousands of times. And the third developed a sudden and inexplicable paralysis that left him unable to work for months. The 4th worker, Thomas Mitchell, avoided physical injury but reported experiencing terrifying nightmares that continued for years after his brief exposure to the unprotected stone. Mr. Mitchell's detailed account of his experience, recorded in interviews conducted by paranormal researcher Dr. Eleanor Hayes in the 1960s, provides insight into the amethyst's continuing power. According to Mitchell, the moment he looked directly at the stone, he felt what he described as a presence entering my mind. This presence brought with it images of ancient temples, priests in elaborate robes, and scenes of violence and desecration that he somehow understood were connected to the stone's origins in India. Most disturbing was Mitchell's report that the presence seemed to communicate with him, expressing rage at the stone's continued captivity and demanding its return to its sacred home. These communications continued in Mitchell's dreams long after his physical contact with the amethyst had ended, and he claimed that the presence had shown him visions of all the previous owners who had suffered because of their connection to the cursed gem. The wartime incidents led to even stricter protocols around the Delhi Purple Sapphire. Museum director Sir William Harrington commissioned a comprehensive review of the stone's containment procedures and implemented what he termed maximum security protocols for its handling. These included requirements for multiple approvals before anyone could access the stone, mandatory psychological evaluations for potential researchers, and the presence of medical personnel during any examination of the artifact. Sir William's personal notes, discovered after his death in 1978, revealed that he had come to view the amethyst as genuinely dangerous rather than simply psychologically provocative. He wrote extensively about the pattern of tragedies that seemed to follow anyone who came into significant contact with the stone, and he expressed concern that the museum's continued possession of the artifact might be putting innocent people at risk. The post-war period brought renewed academic interest in the Delhi Purple Sapphire, as anthropologists and religious scholars began to study it as an example of the psychological and cultural impact of colonial artifact acquisition. Dr. Rajesh Gupta, an Indian scholar studying at Oxford University, requested permission to examine the stone as part of his research into the religious significance of gems in Hindu temple traditions. Dr. Gupta's examination conducted in 1955 under strict security protocols, provided new insights into the amethyst's origins and religious significance. His analysis of the stone's inclusions and surface markings revealed evidence that it had indeed been cut and polished using techniques consistent with medieval Indian craftsmanship. More significantly, he identified traces of substances that were commonly used in Hindu consecration rituals, suggesting that the stone had been formally dedicated to religious purposes before its theft. However, Dr. Gupta's research was cut short when he began experiencing what he described as spiritual attacks. During his examination of the amethyst, despite his deep knowledge of Hindu religious practices and his use of traditional protective rituals, he found himself overwhelmed by what he interpreted as the angry spirits of the violated temple. His research notes, written in a mixture of English and Sanskrit, describe encounters with what he believed were the ghosts of the priests who had originally consecrated the stone centuries earlier. Dr. Gupta's experience was particularly significant because of his cultural and religious background. Unlike previous researchers who had approached the stone from a Western perspective, he understood the full spiritual implications of its theft and desecration. His final report concluded that the amethyst was indeed cursed, not through any supernatural mechanism that Western science could understand, but through the violation of sacred spiritual laws that governed the relationship between physical objects and divine power. The 1960s brought a new generation of paranormal researchers who were attracted to the Delhi purple sapphire as a potentially genuine example of supernatural phenomena. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, mentioned earlier in connection with Thomas Mitchell's account, spent several years studying the stone and interviewing previous victims of its alleged curse. Her comprehensive report, published by the Society for Psychical Research in 1967, documented over 30 cases of individuals who had suffered unusual misfortunes after contact with the amethyst. Dr. Hayes's statistical analysis of these cases revealed patterns that she argued could not be explained by coincidence alone. The rate of accidents, illnesses, financial disasters, and family tragedies among people who had handled the stone was significantly higher than would be expected in a normal population sample. More intriguingly, the severity and timing of these misfortunes seemed to correlate with the duration and intimacy of contact with the amethyst. Perhaps most convincing was Dr. Hayes's documentation of the psychological effects experienced by the stone's victims. Despite coming from different cultural backgrounds and historical periods, they reported remarkably similar experiences, including specific types of nightmares, hallucinations featuring Indian religious imagery, and the sensation of being watched or followed by hostile presences. This consistency across decades and cultures suggested to Dr. Hayes that the experiences were genuine rather than products of suggestion or cultural transmission. By the 1970s, the Delhi purple sapphire had become one of the most studied, allegedly cursed objects in the world. Its documentation was more complete than that of most similar artifacts, and its institutional setting provided a level of credibility that enhanced its reputation among serious researchers. However, this attention also brought increased pressure from various groups who argued that the stone should be returned to India as part of broader efforts to repatriate colonial-era artifacts. The repatriation question became more complex when representatives of several Indian religious organizations contacted the museum, claiming that their communities had historical connections to the stolen amethyst. Each group provided different accounts of the stone's original location and religious significance, and some suggested that its continued captivity in London was preventing the souls of murdered priests from finding peace. These claims were taken seriously by museum officials who had become increasingly uncomfortable with housing an object that seemed to cause genuine harm to those who encountered it. However, the practical challenges of repatriation were enormous. The stone's exact origin remained unclear. Multiple groups claimed ownership, and there were legitimate concerns about whether returning it to India would simply transfer the curse to a new set of victims. The debate over the Delhi Purple Sapphire's future intensified during the 1980s as public awareness of its history grew through media coverage and popular books about cursed objects. Several high-profile incidents brought renewed attention to the stone's malevolent reputation and raised questions about the ethics of maintaining such objects in public institutions. The most significant of these incidents involved Dr. Sarah Williams, a gemologist who had been granted permission to study the amethyst's optical properties using advanced spectroscopic equipment. Despite following all established safety protocols and limiting her exposure to the stone, Dr. Williams experienced a series of personal tragedies that began within days of her examination. Her husband was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer just 1 week after her contact with the stone. Her teenage daughter was severely injured in a car accident that police investigators described as highly unusual and difficult to explain. Most devastating was the suicide of her elderly mother, who had shown no previous signs of depression or mental illness, but left a note claiming that she was being tormented by voices from the east. Dr. Williams herself developed a mysterious illness that left her partially blind and unable to continue her career. Medical specialists were unable to identify the cause of her condition, and she remained convinced until her death in 1995 that her suffering was directly connected to her examination of the cursed amethyst. Her case became a rallying point for those who argued that the stone was too dangerous to be kept in any public institution. Today, the Delhi Purple Sapphire remains in the collection of the Natural History Museum, though it is no longer available for public viewing or academic research. It rests in a specially designed containment system that incorporates elements from Heron Allen's original protective measures, along with modern security technology. Access to the stone requires approval from the museum's board of directors, and such approval has not been granted for over 2 decades. The amethyst's legacy extends far beyond its physical presence in the museum's vaults. It has become a symbol of the complex moral and spiritual questions raised by the colonial acquisition of cultural artifacts, and its documented history provides compelling evidence for those who believe in the reality of cursed objects, whether viewed as a genuine supernatural phenomenon or an powerful example of psychological suggestion and cultural trauma. The Delhi Purple Sapphire remains one of the most thoroughly documented and disturbing cursed objects in existence. Part 5. The Hands Resist Him, the painting that moves on its own. In February 2000, the anonymous corridors of cyberspace became the stage for one of the most documented and terrifying encounters with supernatural art in modern history. What began as a routine eBay auction would evolve into a global phenomenon that challenged conventional understanding of the relationship between artistic creation and paranormal activity. The object at the center of this digital age mystery was a seemingly innocent oil painting created in 1972 by California artist William Stoneham, but the artwork known as The Hands Resist Him would prove to be anything but innocent. The painting itself depicts a haunting scene that seems to capture a moment of childhood terror frozen in time. A young boy stands before a glass door, his expression one of confusion and fear. Beside him looms a life-sized female doll, her Victorian-era dress and porcelain features creating an unsettling contrast with the contemporary setting. Most disturbing are the hands pressed against the glass from the other side. Dozens of disembodied appendages that seem to be reaching desperately toward the viewer, as if trying to break through the barrier between the painted world and reality. William Stoneham created the painting during a particularly introspective period of his artistic career. Born in 1947, Stoneham had established himself as a talented painter with a particular gift for capturing the psychological complexity of childhood experiences. The inspiration for The Hands Resist Him came from a photograph of himself as a 5-year-old taken outside his childhood home in Chicago. In interviews conducted years later, Stoneham described the painting as an exploration of the boundary between childhood and the adult world, with the glass door representing the threshold between innocence and experience. However, Stoneham's artistic intentions were complicated by the personal trauma that had shaped his early years. His childhood had been marked by experiences that he later characterized as supernatural encounters, including sightings of what he believed were ghosts and other paranormal phenomena. These experiences had left him with a deep interest in the thin boundaries between the visible and invisible worlds, themes that would emerge repeatedly in his artwork throughout his career. The female doll in the painting was inspired by a childhood companion that Stoneham remembered with particular vividness. He claimed that this doll had been given to him by a neighbor woman who practiced what she called spiritual healing, and who had warned his parents that the toy possessed unusual properties. According to Stoneham's recollections, the doll had seemed to move on its own and had been associated with several disturbing incidents during his childhood, including unexplained sounds and the appearance of strange figures in his bedroom. The hands pressing against the glass were perhaps the most personal element of the painting for Stoneham. He described them as representing all the souls who had died young, reaching out from whatever realm they inhabited to make contact with the living world. This interpretation was influenced by his belief that he had psychic abilities that allowed him to perceive spirits and other supernatural entities that most people could not see. When The Hands Resist Him was completed in 1972, it was initially displayed at the Fingerton Gallery in Beverly Hills, a prestigious venue known for showcasing emerging artists with unusual or controversial work. The gallery's owner, George Fingarton, was immediately struck by the painting's unsettling power and placed it prominently in the main exhibition space. However, the reaction from gallery visitors was more intense than anyone had anticipated. Several patrons reported feeling physically ill when viewing the painting, describing sensations of nausea, dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of dread. More disturbing were reports from visitors who claimed that the figures in the painting appeared to move when observed from their peripheral vision. Some witnesses insisted that they had seen the boy's expression change and that the doll's head had turned to follow their movements around the gallery. Gallery staff began to notice strange occurrences during the hours when the gallery was closed. Security guards reported hearing the sounds of children playing in the exhibition space late at night, accompanied by what sounded like glass being tapped from the inside. Motion sensors were triggered repeatedly without any apparent cause, and several guards reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the gallery when they investigated the alarms. The most dramatic incident occurred during the painting's third week on display, when night security guard Robert Martinez discovered that several other artworks in the gallery had been moved from their original positions. The paintings had been rearranged to form a circle around the hands resist him, as if the other artworks had been drawn to it during the night. Security cameras had malfunctioned during the period when the movement occurred, recording only static and strange light anomalies. Despite these disturbing events, or perhaps because of them, the painting attracted considerable attention from collectors and art critics. It was eventually purchased by John Manis, a successful Hollywood actor known for his roles in several popular television series of the 1970s. Manis had visited the gallery specifically to see the painting after hearing rumors about its unusual effects on viewers, and he was immediately captivated by its dark beauty and psychological complexity. However, Manis's enthusiasm for his new acquisition quickly turned to regret after the painting was installed in his Beverly Hills home. Within days of the artwork's arrival, strange phenomena began occurring throughout the house. Family members and guests reported hearing the sound of children crying late at night, always seeming to come from the room where the painting was displayed. Manis's young daughter began having nightmares about a sad boy and scary doll who she claimed visited her bedroom while she slept. The phenomena escalated rapidly over the following weeks. Manis's wife reported seeing the figures in the painting move from the corners of her eyes, and she became increasingly reluctant to enter the room where it hung. Their daughter's nightmares intensified to the point where she refused to sleep in her own bedroom, claiming that the boy and doll from the painting would stand beside her bed and whisper to her in voices she couldn't understand. Manis himself began experiencing disturbing encounters with the painting. He would often find himself drawn to stand before it for hours at a time, feeling as though he were being pulled into the painted world behind the glass door. During these episodes, he reported hearing voices that seemed to come from within the painting itself, children's voices pleading for help and begging to be released from some form of imprisonment. The situation reached a crisis point when Manis awoke one night to find his daughter standing motionless in front of the painting, reaching toward it as if trying to touch the glass door depicted within. When he called to her, she showed no response, and he discovered that her eyes were open but completely unfocused, as if she were sleepwalking while standing upright. It took several minutes of gentle shaking to rouse her from this trance-like state, and she had no memory of leaving her bed or going to the painting. Desperate to protect his family, Manis decided to remove the painting from his home. However, he soon discovered that finding a buyer for the artwork was more challenging than expected. Word of the painting's unusual effects had spread through Hollywood's tight-knit entertainment community, and potential purchasers were reluctant to acquire something with such a disturbing reputation. The painting was eventually purchased by an anonymous collector who kept it for several years before deciding to sell it through more discreet channels. During this period, little is known about the artwork's history, though rumors persisted in collector circles about continued supernatural activity associated with it. Some sources suggest that it changed hands several times during the 1980s and 1990s, with each owner experiencing similar phenomena. Before deciding to dispose of it, the painting's return to public attention came in February 2000, when it appeared in an eBay auction listed by sellers who identified themselves only as a family from California. The auction description was unlike anything the online marketplace had seen before, providing detailed warnings about the painting's supernatural properties and disclaiming any responsibility for harm that might come to potential buyers. According to the seller's account, they had acquired the painting from an elderly man who was moving into assisted living and needed to dispose of his possessions quickly. The man had warned them that the painting was haunted, but had provided little additional information about its history. Initially skeptical of such claims, the family had hung the painting in their home and soon began experiencing phenomena that convinced them of its malevolent nature. Their 3-year-old daughter was the first to react to the painting's presence, pointing at it and saying, "The children are crying." Whenever she was in the same room, she began having severe nightmares that she described as featuring the boy and doll from the painting, who she claimed were trying to take her to the place behind the glass. Her behavior during the day became increasingly erratic, and she would often be found standing in front of the painting, carrying on conversations with figures that only she could see. The family's experiences escalated when they began hearing sounds coming from the room where the painting was displayed. These included children's voices, footsteps, and what sounded like someone tapping on glass. Most disturbing were the nights when they would discover that the painting had apparently been moved from its position on the wall, though it was always returned to its original location by morning. The situation became unbearable when family members began reporting that they could see the figures in the painting moving during the night. The boy would step closer to the glass door, his expression changing from confusion to desperation, while the doll would turn its head to watch anyone who entered the room. The hands pressed against the glass from the other side would writhe and reach as if trying to break through the barrier between the painted world and reality. Convinced that the painting posed a genuine threat to their family's safety, the sellers decided to auction it on eBay with full disclosure of its supernatural properties. Their listing included detailed photographs of the artwork and a comprehensive warning about the phenomena associated with it. They explicitly stated that they were selling the painting to transfer what they believed was a genuine curse to whoever was willing to accept the risk. The eBay auction attracted international attention as word of the haunted painting spread through internet forums and paranormal interest groups. Bidding was intense, with serious collectors of supernatural artifacts competing against curiosity seekers and paranormal researchers. The final sale price reached $1,025, a significant sum for an unknown artist's work, but modest considering the global attention the auction had generated. The winning bidder was Kim Smith, an art restorer from Grand Rapids, Michigan, who specialized in conservation work for private collectors and small museums. Smith had been drawn to the auction not by belief in the supernatural, but by the painting's obvious artistic merit and the fascinating story surrounding it. She intended to study the work as an example of how folklore and superstition could become attached to particular artworks. However, Smith's skeptical approach was challenged almost immediately after the painting arrived at her studio. Within hours of unpacking the artwork, she began experiencing many of the same phenomena reported by previous owners. Her usually calm demeanor was disrupted by a persistent sense of being watched, and she found herself avoiding the area of her studio where the painting was displayed. More disturbing were the changes Smith observed in her pets. Her 2 cats, normally social and affectionate animals, refused to enter the studio and would hiss and flee if carried near the painting. Her dog, a typically brave German Shepherd, exhibited signs of extreme anxiety whenever the painting was visible. whimpering and trembling in a manner that Smith had never observed before. Smith's documentation of her experiences with the hands resist him was more systematic than that of previous owners, reflecting her professional training in art conservation and her initial skepticism about supernatural explanations. She kept detailed records of unusual occurrences, photographed any changes in the painting's condition, and even set up video equipment to monitor the artwork during nighttime hours. Her recordings captured several anomalous events that defied conventional explanation. Video footage showed the painting apparently glowing with a faint light during the early morning hours, though no external light source could account for the phenomenon. More disturbing were the audio recordings that captured sounds of children whispering and crying in the vicinity of the painting. Voices that were not audible to the human ear, but were clearly picked up by sensitive recording equipment. Smith's scientific approach to documenting the painting's effects was complicated by her own growing psychological response to the artwork. Despite her professional training and initial skepticism, she found herself becoming increasingly disturbed by the painting's presence in her studio. She began experiencing vivid dreams featuring the boy and doll from the painting, and she developed a persistent feeling that she was being watched by hostile presences. The situation escalated when Smith began to notice changes in the painting itself. Details that she was certain had appeared one way began to look different, as if the artist's original work was somehow altering itself over time. The boy's expression seemed to shift between confusion and terror. The doll's position appeared to change slightly from day to day, and the hands behind the glass seemed to press more urgently against the barrier. Most unsettling was Smith's growing conviction that the painting was somehow alive and aware of her presence. She reported feeling as though she were being studied by the figures within the artwork, as if they were as conscious of her as she was of them. This sensation became so overwhelming that she eventually moved the cursed artifacts, objects that should have stayed buried. Part 6. The Chair of Death, the seat that no one survives. In the quiet market town of Thirsk, North Yorkshire, England, stands a museum housing one of the most feared objects in British folklore. Suspended high on the wall, far from any visitor's reach, hangs what locals call the Chair of Death. This simple wooden chair, now known as Busby's stoop chair, has reportedly claimed the lives of dozens of people who made the fatal mistake of sitting in it. The story begins in 1702 with Thomas Busby, a counterfeiter and petty criminal who lived in the village of Thirsk. Busby had married Elizabeth, the daughter of Daniel Ottey, a local farmer. The relationship between Busby and his father-in-law was strained at best, with Ottey disapproving of his daughter's choice in husband. Busby operated his counterfeiting business from a local inn, where he had claimed a particular oak chair as his own. He would sit in this chair daily, conducting his illegal business and drinking with fellow criminals. The tension between the two men reached a breaking point when Ottey discovered the full extent of Busby's criminal activities. On a fateful evening, Ottey arrived at the inn to confront his son-in-law and demand that Elizabeth return home with him. The argument escalated quickly, with Busby becoming increasingly agitated at what he saw as interference in his marriage and business. When Ottey threatened to expose Busby's counterfeiting operation to the authorities, the confrontation turned violent. In a fit of rage, Busby attacked his father-in-law with a hammer, killing him instantly. Rather than face the consequences immediately, Busby attempted to dispose of the body by burying it in a field outside the village. However, his crime was soon discovered, and he was arrested by local constables. During his trial, Busby showed no remorse for his actions, maintaining that Otti had brought his fate upon himself through his interference. On the day of his execution in 1702, Busby was granted a final request to have one last drink at his favorite inn, whereas he sat in his familiar chair for the final time. Witnesses reported that he seemed unusually calm, almost serene. It was then that he made the pronouncement that would echo through the centuries. Standing up from the chair and addressing the gathered crowd, Busby declared that anyone who dared to sit in his chair would meet a sudden and violent death, just as he was about to face. After Busby was hanged at the crossroads outside Thirsk, the chair remained at the inn, which was renamed the Busby Stoop Inn in his memory. Initially, locals were wary of the chair, but not particularly afraid. However, as the years passed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Visitors to the inn who sat in Busby's chair began experiencing fatal accidents with alarming frequency. The first documented case occurred just months after Busby's execution. A traveling merchant who had stopped at the inn for the night sat in the chair while enjoying his evening meal. He was found dead in his room the next morning, apparently having choked on his food. The innkeeper initially dismissed this as a coincidence, but similar incidents continued to occur with increasing regularity. During World War II, the chair gained notoriety among RAF personnel stationed at nearby Thirsk airfield. Local airmen would dare each other to sit in the cursed chair before missions, treating it as a macabre joke. According to local records, several of these brave young men never returned from their flights. Their planes either shot down or crashed under mysterious circumstances. The pattern became so pronounced that commanding officers eventually banned their personnel from visiting the inn. One of the most well-documented cases involved a chimney sweep who sat in the chair during a lunch break in the 1960s. Within hours of leaving the inn, he fell from a roof he was cleaning and died instantly. A cleaning woman at the inn accidentally bumped into the chair while mopping and later developed a brain tumor that proved fatal. A roofer who sat in the chair during a renovation project died when the roof he was working on suddenly collapsed. The death toll continued to mount throughout the 20th century. Local records suggest that as many as 63 people who sat in the chair met untimely deaths, often within days or even hours of their encounter with the cursed furniture. The deaths occurred in various ways, from car accidents and falls to sudden illnesses and workplace mishaps, but they all shared the common thread of having occurred shortly after contact with Busby's chair. By the 1970s, the chair's reputation had grown to such an extent that the inn's owners were struggling with the moral implications of keeping it accessible to the public. Tony Earnshaw, the landlord at the time, made the difficult decision to donate the chair to the Thirsk Museum in 1978. However, even the museum staff were reluctant to take possession of such a notorious object. When furniture historian examined the chair upon its arrival at the museum, they made an interesting discovery. The construction techniques used in the chair, particularly the machine-turned spindles, were inconsistent with 18th century craftsmanship. This finding suggested that the chair might not have been the original one sat in by Thomas Busby, but rather a replacement that had somehow inherited the curse over the centuries. Despite this revelation, the museum decided to take no chances with their new acquisition. The chair was permanently suspended from the ceiling, ensuring that no visitor could accidentally sit in it. Even maintenance staff and cleaners are strictly forbidden from touching the chair, and it remains hanging several feet above the ground to this day. The museum's precautions have proven wise, as even in its secured position, the chair continues to generate incidents. Security cameras have reportedly captured unexplained movements around the chair's display area, and several visitors have reported feeling suddenly ill or experiencing panic attacks when standing beneath it. Museum staff members have occasionally reported hearing creaking sounds from the chair during quiet hours, despite the fact that it hangs motionless in the climate-controlled environment. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to explain the chair's deadly reputation through various theories. Some suggest that Busby's intense emotions at the time of his curse somehow imprinted themselves on the object, creating a psychic trap that feeds on the life force of those who come into contact with it. Others propose that the chair serves as a conduit for negative energy, attracting misfortune to those who sit in it. Skeptics, however, point to the power of suggestion and confirmation bias as more likely explanations for the chair's reputation. They argue that once the legend was established, people began attributing unrelated deaths to the chair, creating a self-perpetuating myth. The fact that hundreds of people must have sat in the chair over the centuries without incident is often overlooked in favor of the more sensational stories of those who died. Regardless of whether one believes in curses or dismisses them as superstition, the Chair of Death remains one of the most feared objects in England. Its current home in the Thirsk Museum serves as both a historical artifact and a cautionary tale about the power of belief and the enduring nature of fear. The chair hangs there still, silent and unreachable, a wooden reminder that some things are perhaps better left untouched. Part 7. Cece's Revenge, the Ice Mummy, and his trail of dead scientists. On September 19, 1991, German tourists Helmut and Erika Simon were hiking through the Etztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy when they made a discovery that would change archaeology forever and, according to some, unleash an ancient curse upon the modern world. What they initially thought was the body of a recent mountaineering accident victim turned out to be the naturally mummified remains of a man who had died over 5,300 years ago. This Copper Age hunter, quickly dubbed C. the Iceman after the valley where he was found, would become one of the most studied prehistoric humans in history. But his emergence from the ice would allegedly bring death to many of those who disturbed his ancient rest. The discovery of C.I. was nothing short of miraculous from a scientific perspective. The combination of cold temperatures, wind, and the glacier's movement had preserved his body, clothing, and equipment in remarkable detail. He was found wearing a leather loincloth, leather leggings, a goatskin jacket, and shoes stuffed with grass for insulation. His possessions included a copper axe, a flint knife, a bow and arrows, and various other tools that provided unprecedented insight into Copper Age technology and lifestyle. However, from the moment C.I. was removed from his icy tomb, a series of tragic events began to unfold that would lead some to believe that the ancient hunter was exacting revenge on those who had disturbed his eternal rest. The pattern of deaths and misfortunes that followed seemed too coincidental to dismiss as mere chance, leading to the emergence of what became known as the Curse of C.I. The first victim of the alleged curse was Rainer Henn, a 64-year-old forensic pathologist from the University of Innsbruck, who served as the head of the team examining Cece's remains. Henn was the scientist who carefully placed Cece's frozen body into a body bag after its discovery, making him one of the first people to have direct physical contact with the mummy. Just 1 year after Cece's discovery, Henn was killed in a car accident while traveling to give a lecture about the Iceman. The irony was not lost on those who knew him that he died while on his way to discuss the very discovery that may have sealed his fate. The second death attributed to the curse was that of Kurt Fritz, an Austrian mountaineer who had played a crucial role in the recovery operation. Fritz was among the team that used pneumatic drills to extract sea from the ice, and he was photographed posing with the mummy shortly after its removal. In 1993, just 2 years after the discovery, Fritz was killed in an avalanche while mountain climbing. What made his death particularly eerie was that he was an experienced mountaineer who knew the terrain well, yet he was the only member of his climbing party to be killed in the avalanche. Perhaps even more disturbing was the fate of Helmut Simon, one of the 2 tourists who had originally discovered CI. Simon had become something of a celebrity after finding the Iceman, giving interviews and lectures about the discovery. However, his fame came with a price. In October 2004, 13 years after finding CI, Simon went missing during a hiking trip in the same area where the Iceman had been discovered. When search teams finally located his body 8 days later, they found it frozen in the ice, in an uncanny parallel to his famous discovery. The 67-year-old experienced hiker had apparently fallen through snow into a crevasse and died of hypothermia, becoming trapped in the ice just like the ancient hunter he had found years earlier. The 4th victim was Dieter Warnick, the head of the mountain rescue team that had recovered Simon's body. Warnick, who was 45 years old and in excellent physical condition, died of a heart attack just 1 hour after Simon's funeral. The timing of his death, so closely following his involvement in the recovery of another cursed victim, struck many as more than coincidental. Konrad Spindler, an archaeologist at the University of Innsbruck, who had been studying CI since his discovery, became the 5th alleged victim of the curse. Spindler had been one of the most prominent researchers working on the Iceman project and had written extensively about the discovery. In 2005, he was diagnosed with a rare brain tumor and died within months of the diagnosis. Before his death, Spindler had publicly dismissed the idea of a curse, stating that he didn't believe in such superstitions. Ironically, his last major interview was about debunking the very curse that would supposedly claim his life. Tom Loy, an American archaeologist who had been studying blood residues found on Cece's clothing and weapons, became another victim attributed to the curse. Loy's research had revealed that Cece had been involved in violent conflict before his death, as evidenced by blood from multiple individuals found on his gear. This groundbreaking work provided crucial insights into the Iceman's final days, but it may have cost Loy his life. In 2005, he died from a blood condition that caused clotting problems, a hereditary disease that had remained dormant until he was well into his career studying TSI. The 7th and most recent death linked to the curse was that of Erika Simon, the co-discoverer of CI, along with her husband Helmut. In 2013, 22 years after finding the Iceman, Erika died from cancer. While cancer might seem like a natural cause of death for someone in their 70s, believers in the curse point out that both original discoverers of CI died within less than a decade of each other, and both in ways that seemed to echo themes related to their famous discovery. The apparent curse has affected not just those who died, but others who have worked closely with CIS. Several researchers and officials involved with the Iceman project have reported unusual runs of bad luck, including career setbacks, financial problems, and family tragedies. Some have developed inexplicable health problems after working with the mummy. while others have experienced a series of accidents and misfortunes that they attribute to their involvement with sea. The psychological impact of the alleged curse has been significant enough to affect scientific research on the mummy. Some researchers have admitted to feeling uneasy when working directly with Cece's remains, and at least one forensic specialist reportedly refused to examine the body without first receiving a religious blessing. The curse has become so associated with the Iceman that it has entered popular culture, inspiring documentaries, books, and television programs about the supposed supernatural revenge of the ancient hunter. Skeptics, however, offer more rational explanations for the deaths and misfortunes attributed to Cece's curse. They point out that hundreds of people have been involved in various aspects of research, excavation, and exhibition related to the Iceman over the past 3 decades. When viewed in this context, 7 deaths over more than 20 years might not be statistically significant, especially considering that many of those involved were older individuals engaged in physically demanding or higher-risk activities like mountain climbing and archaeological fieldwork. Furthermore, several of the deaths can be explained by natural causes or occupational hazards. Mountain climbing and rescue work are inherently dangerous activities, and deaths in these fields, while tragic, are not uncommon. The medical conditions that claimed some of the victims, such as heart attacks and cancer, are unfortunately common causes of death among people of their age groups. Despite rational explanations, the legend of Cece's curse continues to grow. The story taps into ancient fears about disturbing the dead and the consequences of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. The fact that Tai himself died violently, struck down by an arrow while fleeing through the mountains, adds another layer to the narrative. Some believe that his violent death left him as a restless spirit, seeking vengeance against those who would disturb his final resting place. The curse narrative has also been fueled by the circumstances surrounding Cece's death and burial. Recent research has revealed that the Iceman was likely fleeing from attackers when he was struck by an arrow in his left shoulder. He managed to remove the arrow shaft, but bled to death from the wound. His body was then naturally mummified by the specific conditions of the glacier where he fell. The violent nature of his death, combined with the fact that he was essentially murdered and left unburied by ancient standards, fits with traditional beliefs about the types of deaths most likely to result in restless spirits. From a cultural perspective, the curse of CI reflects broader anxieties about scientific progress and the potential consequences of disturbing ancient sites. In an age where archaeological discoveries regularly challenge our understanding of the past, the idea that some knowledge might come at too high a price resonates with many people. The curse serves as a modern folklore, a cautionary tale about respecting the dead and the mysteries of the past. Today, Cece's remains are housed in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, where they are kept in a specialized climate-controlled chamber. Visitors can view the mummy through a small window, but direct contact is limited to authorized researchers following strict protocols, whether or not one believes in the curse. The story of Cece's revenge has become an integral part of his legacy, adding an element of supernatural mystery to one of archaeology's greatest discoveries. The debate over Cece's curse continues to this day, with new researchers occasionally expressing concern about working too closely with the famous mummy. While science marches forward and new discoveries about the Iceman continue to emerge, The shadow of the alleged curse serves as a reminder that some mysteries of the past may be more dangerous to explore than others. Part 8. The Black Orlov, the diamond that drove women to suicide. In the shadowy world of cursed gemstones, few stones carry a reputation as dark and bloody as the Black Orlov, a 67.5 black diamond whose history is written in suicide, madness, and death. Unlike its more famous cousin, the Hope Diamond, the Black Orlov's curse seems to target women specifically, driving them to leap to their deaths from great heights. The stone's journey from a sacred Hindu temple to the jewelry boxes of European nobility is a tale of theft, betrayal, and supernatural vengeance that continues to this day. The Black Orlov's story begins in India, where the diamond was originally known as the Eye of Brahma. According to legend, the stone served as one of the eyes in a statue of the Hindu god Brahma in a temple in Pondicherry. For centuries, the diamond remained in its sacred setting, revered by devotees and protected by priests who understood its spiritual significance. The stone was said to possess mystical properties, serving as a conduit between the earthly and divine realms. The diamond's troubles began during the chaotic period of colonial expansion in India. In the early 19th century, a French soldier of fortune, whose name has been lost to history, broke into the temple and pried the Black Orlov from the statue's eye socket. This act of desecration was considered one of the gravest sins in Hindu belief, as it involved not only theft but the defilement of a sacred image. Local priests reportedly pronounced a curse upon the stone and anyone who would possess it, calling upon Brahma to exact divine vengeance upon those who had violated his sacred image. The French thief managed to smuggle the diamond out of India, but his triumph was short-lived. Within months of the theft, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances, apparently having taken his own life in a fit of madness. Some accounts suggest he threw himself from a window, beginning what would become the Black Orlov's signature method of claiming its victims. The diamond then disappeared from historical records for several decades, presumably passing through various hands in the underground gem trade. When it resurfaced in the 1890s, it had made its way to Russia, where it caught the attention of the Romanov court. The stone's exotic beauty and mysterious origins made it a perfect addition to the imperial collection, and it was acquired by members of the Russian nobility. It was during this period that the Black Orlov earned its current name, though the exact origin of the Orlov designation remains unclear. Some historians suggest it was named after a Russian count who owned it briefly, while others believe it was simply to distinguish it from other famous diamonds in Russian collections. Regardless of its naming, the stone's deadly reputation began to establish itself in earnest during its Russian period. The first well-documented victim of the Black Orlov's curse was Princess Nadezhda Petrovna Orlov, a Russian noblewoman who acquired the diamond in the 1890s. Princess Orlov was known for her beauty and intelligence, but after wearing the Black Orlov to several court functions, she began to experience severe depression and paranoid delusions. Friends and family noticed a dramatic change in her personality, describing her as increasingly agitated and fearful. In 1947, Princess Orlov threw herself from a window of her palace, dying instantly. Witnesses reported that she was clutching the Black Orlov when her body was discovered. The diamond passed to another Russian aristocrat, Princess Golitsyn Bariatinsky, who initially dismissed the stories of the curse as superstitious nonsense. However, within months of acquiring the stone, she too began to exhibit signs of mental distress. The princess, once known for her vibrant social life, became increasingly reclusive and paranoid. She complained of nightmares featuring Hindu deities and spoke of feeling constantly watched by unseen eyes. In 1952, Princess Golitsyn Bariatinski leaped to her death from her apartment building in Rome, following the same pattern as her predecessor. The deaths of 2 Russian princesses within 5 years created a sensation in European high society. The Black Orlov became known as the suicide diamond, and many wealthy collectors refused to consider purchasing it despite its beauty and rarity. However, the stone's reputation only seemed to increase its allure for certain buyers, particularly those who believed they could resist its alleged supernatural influence. The diamond's next notable owner was Countess Kospora, another member of Russian nobility who had fled to Western Europe following the Russian Revolution. The Countess acquired the Black Orlov in the mid-1950s, reportedly purchasing it at a steep discount due to its sinister reputation. Like her predecessors, she initially scoffed at the idea of a cursed gemstone, viewing such beliefs as primitive superstition. However, the Countess's skepticism did not protect her from the diamond's influence. Within months of acquiring the stone, she began experiencing the same symptoms that had plagued previous owners. She complained of insomnia, claiming that she could hear voices whispering to her in Sanskrit whenever she tried to sleep. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and she developed an obsession with death and Hindu mythology. In late 1955, Countess Kospora jumped from the roof of her mansion, becoming the 3rd victim of the Black Orlov's curse. The pattern was becoming undeniable to those who tracked the diamond's bloody history. Each owner, regardless of their initial skepticism, fell victim to the same cycle of mental deterioration, culminating in suicide by leaping from a great height. The timing was also remarkably consistent, with each woman dying within months of acquiring the stone. The curse seemed to work quickly and efficiently, suggesting a malevolent intelligence behind its operation. Following the Countess's death, the Black Orlov disappeared from public view for several years. Some believed it had been locked away in a vault somewhere, while others suggested it might have been returned to India in an attempt to appease the violated deity. However, the diamond resurfaced in the 1960s in the possession of Charles F. Winson, a New York diamond dealer who specialized in historically significant gemstones. Winson was well aware of the Black Orlov's reputation, but as a male dealer rather than a female owner, he seemed to be immune to its curse. Some theorists suggested that the curse specifically targeted women, possibly because the original statue from which it was stolen represented a male deity who felt particularly offended by female possession of his sacred eye. Winson kept the diamond for several years without incident, but he was careful never to sell it to female clients, recognizing that the stone's reputation made it difficult to sell in its current form. Winson made a controversial decision that horrified purists, but may have saved future lives. In 1969, he had the Black Orlov recut, reducing its size from 195 carats to 67.50 carats and changing its shape significantly. The theory behind this drastic action was that altering the stone's physical form would break the curse by destroying the original sacred object that had been stolen from the temple. The recuting process was supervised by experts who took extraordinary precautions, including having Hindu priests perform purification ceremonies before, during, and after the work. Some of the material removed during the cutting was reportedly returned to India and buried in holy ground, while other fragments were incorporated into smaller stones that were distributed to temples as an offering of restitution. Whether through the power of the recuting ceremony or simple coincidence, the Black Orlov's deadly pattern seemed to be broken. Since 1969, the diamond has changed hands several times without resulting in the suicide of its owners. It has been displayed in museums and private collections, and while some owners report feeling uneasy in its presence, none have succumbed to the dramatic fate that befell its earlier possessors. The Black Orlov currently resides in a private collection, though it occasionally appears in museum exhibitions and jewelry shows. Modern gemologists have studied the stone extensively, noting its unusual structure and composition. Black diamonds are relatively rare and are formed under different conditions than traditional colorless diamonds, leading some scientists to speculate that the Black Orlov's unique properties might somehow contribute to its psychological effects on susceptible individuals. Skeptics offer various explanations for the Black Orlov's deadly history. They point out that the Russian nobility of the early 20th century lived through incredibly traumatic times, including revolution, exile, and the loss of their ancestral way of life. The high rate of suicide among Russian aristocrats during this period was well documented and likely had more to do with their circumstances than with cursed gemstones. Additionally, the power of suggestion cannot be underestimated. Once the diamond acquired its reputation as a suicide stone, subsequent owners may have unconsciously fulfilled the prophecy through their own expectations and fears. The psychological pressure of owning a reportedly cursed object, combined with the dramatic stories of previous owners, could easily trigger depression and suicidal ideation in vulnerable individuals. However, believers in the curse point to the remarkably consistent pattern of deaths and the specific method by which each victim died. The fact that all three documented victims jumped to their deaths, despite this being a relatively uncommon method of suicide among their social class, suggests something more than mere coincidence at work. The Black Orlov's story also raises broader questions about cultural appropriation and the consequences of removing sacred objects from their original contexts. The diamond's journey from a revered temple ornament to a European status symbol represents the broader pattern of colonial exploitation that characterized the 19th and early 20th centuries. In this context, the curse can be seen as a form of spiritual resistance, a way for the violated culture to exact revenge upon those who profited from its desecration. Today, the Black Orlov serves as both a beautiful gemstone and a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of greed and cultural insensitivity. While its curse may have been broken through ritual and recutting, the story of its bloody history continues to fascinate and terrify those who hear it. The diamond stands as a reminder that some objects carry more than mere monetary value, bearing within them the weight of history, belief, and the very real power of human faith in the supernatural. Whether one believes in curses or dismisses them as superstition, the Black Orlov's legacy is undeniable. It has claimed at least 3 lives and terrorized countless others, earning its place among the world's most feared gemstones. As it sits in its current setting, cut down but not forgotten, the Black Orlov continues to serve as a bridge between the ancient world of gods and curses and our modern age of science and skepticism. Part 9. The Terracotta Army Curse. The tomb you still can't open. In 1974, farmers digging a well in Xi'an, China, made what would become one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. What they found buried beneath centuries of earth would change our understanding of ancient Chinese civilization forever. But it would also unleash what many believe to be a curse that continues to claim victims to this day. The discovery of the Terracotta Army, an underground legion of over 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers guarding the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, brought fame and fortune to some, but death and misfortune to many others. The story begins with Yang Jifa, a farmer who was digging a well during a severe drought when his shovel struck something hard beneath the soil. What he initially thought was a piece of pottery turned out to be the face of a clay warrior, perfectly preserved after more than 2,000 years underground. This single discovery would lead to the excavation of one of the most spectacular archaeological sites in human history. But it would also set in motion a series of events that locals came to believe were cursed by the ancient emperor himself. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who ruled from 259 to 210 BCE, was known for his paranoia, cruelty, and obsession with immortality. He unified China through conquest and brutal suppression, building the first version of the Great Wall and standardizing everything from currency to writing systems. But his greatest project was his own tomb, a massive underground complex designed to serve as his palace in the afterlife. Historical records suggest that over 700,000 workers labored for decades to complete the tomb, and many were sealed inside alive to prevent them from revealing its secrets. The Emperor's Tomb complex covers over 38 square miles, with the famous Terracotta Army representing just a small portion of the entire site. According to ancient texts, the main burial chamber contains a replica of the known world, complete with rivers of mercury and a ceiling studded with jewels to represent the stars. Deadly traps were reportedly installed throughout the complex to kill anyone who dared to enter without permission. More ominously, historical accounts suggest that Qin Shi Huang's burial was accompanied by dark rituals designed to ensure his power would extend beyond death. When Yang Jifa made his discovery, he had no idea he was about to disturb the eternal rest of one of history's most powerful and vengeful rulers. The initial excavation of the Terracotta Army was conducted with great excitement by Chinese archaeologists who recognized the immense historical significance of the find. However, it soon became apparent that the site was not giving up its secrets willingly. The first sign of trouble came when several workers involved in the initial excavation began experiencing inexplicable health problems. These men, who had been in excellent physical condition, suddenly developed severe respiratory issues, skin conditions, and neurological problems. Local doctors were baffled by the symptoms, which didn't match any known diseases. Some workers reported vivid nightmares featuring ancient Chinese soldiers, while others claimed to hear the sound of marching feet coming from beneath the earth. Yang Jifa, the farmer who had made the original discovery, found that his moment of fame quickly turned into a nightmare. Rather than bringing him prosperity, the discovery of the Terracotta Army led to a series of personal tragedies that devastated his life. His crops began failing mysteriously, despite the same farming techniques that had sustained his family for generations. His livestock died from unknown diseases, and his family members began falling ill with various ailments. Most tragically, Yang's youngest son died suddenly, and without explanation, just months after the discovery. The boy had been healthy and active, but he developed a fever that no amount of medical treatment could break. As he lay dying, the child reportedly spoke of seeing ancient soldiers standing around his bed, calling to him in a language he didn't understand. Yang became convinced that his family was being punished for disturbing the emperor's eternal guards. The curse seemed to extend beyond the immediate discoverers to affect anyone who became too closely involved with the site. Xiao Kangmin, the archaeologist who first recognized the significance of Yang's find, experienced a dramatic reversal of fortune after his initial success. Despite his crucial role in one of archaeology's greatest discoveries, Xiao found himself marginalized and eventually forced into early retirement. His health deteriorated rapidly, and he died in relative obscurity, far from the recognition he deserved for his contributions to Chinese archaeology. Several other archaeologists and officials involved in the early excavation work met similar fates. Dr. Yuan Zhongyi, one of the leading experts on the Terracotta Army, suffered a series of personal and professional setbacks that left him broken and bitter. His research was repeatedly blocked by bureaucratic obstacles. His funding was mysteriously cut, and his family life disintegrated under the strain of his obsession with the site. Colleagues noted that Yuan seemed to age rapidly after beginning his work with the terracotta warriors, as if the very act of studying them was draining his life force. The pattern of misfortune extended to government officials as well. Local party secretary Li Fengxian, who had championed the excavation and development of the site as a tourist attraction, died suddenly of a heart attack, just as the site was gaining international recognition. His death was particularly shocking because he had been in excellent health and was only in his early 50s. His successor, Wang Zuli, lasted less than 2 years in the position before suffering a complete mental breakdown that forced his resignation. Even international experts who came to study the Terracotta Army were not immune to the site's apparent curse. Professor Heinrich Harrer, an Austrian archaeologist who spent several months documenting the warriors, returned to Europe only to find his academic career in ruins. His research was discredited, his marriage fell apart, and he eventually died alone and impoverished. Dr. Sarah Williams, a British expert in ancient Chinese art, suffered a similar fate after publishing a groundbreaking paper on the Terracotta Army's construction techniques. She lost her university position, developed severe depression, and ultimately took her own life. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the reports from construction workers involved in building the museum complex around the excavation site. Multiple workers died in accidents that seemed to defy explanation. Scaffolding would collapse without warning. Heavy equipment would malfunction at crucial moments, and some workers simply vanished without a trace. Local newspapers reported at least 15 construction-related deaths during the building of the museum, a number that far exceeded normal workplace accident rates. The curse wasn't limited to those directly involved with the excavation and study of the site. Tour guides who worked at the museum reported experiencing strange phenomena, including unexplained temperature drops, the sound of ancient Chinese music playing when no source could be identified, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Several guides quit their jobs after claiming to see the terracotta warriors moving slightly when no one was looking, as if the clay soldiers were slowly coming to life. Even tourists were not entirely safe from the site's malevolent influence. While the vast majority of visitors experienced nothing unusual, there were reports of people fainting suddenly while viewing the warriors, developing severe headaches that lasted for days after their visit. or experiencing vivid nightmares featuring ancient Chinese soldiers. A few tourists reported that photographs taken at the site showed mysterious figures that hadn't been visible to the naked eye, leading some to believe that the spirits of the emperor's army were still actively guarding their posts. The Chinese government's response to these reports was predictably skeptical, officially dismissing the idea of a curse as superstitious nonsense. However, their actions suggested a different level of concern. Access to the site was heavily restricted, with only authorized personnel allowed in certain areas. The main burial chamber of Emperor Qin Shi Huang himself remained completely sealed, with officials citing concerns about preservation and potential archaeological damage. However, insiders suggested that the real reason for avoiding the main tomb was fear of what might be unleashed if it were opened. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies have confirmed that the main burial chamber is indeed intact and contains what appears to be a vast underground palace. The readings show structures, corridors, and chambers that match historical descriptions of the tomb's contents, including the legendary rivers of mercury that were said to flow through miniature representations of China's major waterways. However, each attempt to gather more detailed information about the tomb's interior has been met with technical failures, equipment malfunctions, or unexplained accidents. In 1999, a team of international scientists was granted permission to use advanced ground-penetrating radar to map the tomb's interior structure. The project was halted abruptly after 3 team members were hospitalized with severe mercury poisoning, despite the fact that they had not been exposed to any known sources of mercury during their work. Soil samples taken from around the tomb showed mercury levels hundreds of times higher than normal, suggesting that the ancient accounts of mercury rivers might be accurate and that the tomb's contents were slowly leaking into the surrounding environment. The most disturbing aspect of the Terracotta Army curse may be its apparent ability to affect people through modern technology. Several documentary film crews have reported equipment failures when attempting to film certain areas of the site. Cameras would malfunction inexplicably. Audio equipment would pick up sounds that weren't audible to human ears. And footage would sometimes show anomalous figures or movements that hadn't been visible during filming. One British television crew had to abandon their project entirely after their director suffered a severe nervous breakdown following weeks of technical problems and unexplained phenomena. Computer systems used to catalog and study the terracotta warriors have also exhibited strange behaviors. Digital photographs of certain warriors would become corrupted without explanation. Research databases would spontaneously delete themselves, and 3D modeling software would produce distorted images that bore little resemblance to the actual statues being scanned. Some technicians reported that their computer screens would occasionally display Chinese characters that weren't part of any known font or language system, leading to speculation that the ancient emperor was somehow communicating through modern technology. The curse's influence seemed to extend even to those who studied the Terracotta Army from a distance. Dr. Michael Chen, a Chinese-American historian at UCLA who wrote extensively about the site without ever visiting it in person, experienced a series of setbacks that mirrored the experiences of those who had worked on site. His research grants were mysteriously canceled. His academic papers were rejected by journals that had previously published his work, and his personal life deteriorated rapidly. He eventually abandoned his research on the Terracotta Army entirely, claiming that he felt as if he were being watched and threatened by an unseen presence. The financial curse associated with the site has been particularly pronounced. While the Terracotta Army has generated billions of dollars in tourism revenue for China, many of the individuals and companies directly involved in its commercialization have suffered financial ruin. Hotels built specifically to cater to tourists visiting the site have gone bankrupt with surprising frequency. Restaurants in the area have struggled with unexplained health code violations and food poisoning outbreaks, and tours companies have faced a steady stream of accidents and insurance claims that have driven many out of business. Even the souvenir industry has been affected by the curse. Manufacturers producing replica terracotta warriors have reported unusual production problems, including clay that would crack for no apparent reason, glazes that would turn colors not found in nature, and finished products that would break during shipping despite careful packaging. Several factories producing these replicas have been forced to close after experiencing fires, floods, or other disasters that destroyed their facilities and inventory. The curse has also manifested in more subtle ways that suggest a malevolent intelligence behind the phenomena. Researchers have noted that problems seem to intensify when investigations come too close to revealing sensitive information about the tomb's contents, or when plans are made to expand excavation activities. It's as if the ancient emperor is actively monitoring modern activities and intervening when his privacy is threatened. Local residents in the Xi'an area have long accepted the reality of the curse, incorporating it into their daily lives and beliefs. Many families who have lived in the region for generations claim that their ancestors warned against disturbing the emperor's rest, and they view the modern archaeological work as a violation of ancient taboos. Some locals perform regular rituals and offerings to appease the emperor's spirit, and there are reports that these practices have helped protect certain individuals from the curse's effects. Traditional Chinese medicine practitioners in the area have developed specific treatments for what they call emperor's sickness, a condition characterized by unexplained fatigue, nightmares, and a sense of being watched. These treatments typically involve herbs, acupuncture, and spiritual rituals designed to cleanse the patient of negative spiritual influences. While modern medicine dismisses these practices as placebo effects, many people who have worked at the Terracotta Army site swear by their effectiveness. The Chinese government continues to maintain its official skepticism about the curse, but their policies regarding the site suggest a more cautious approach than their public statements would indicate. Plans for major excavations are repeatedly delayed or canceled, citing budgetary concerns or technical difficulties. International collaboration on research projects is severely limited, and access to certain areas of the site remains completely forbidden, even to authorized researchers. The tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang remains unopened to this day, more than 40 years after the discovery of the Terracotta Army. While officials cite preservation concerns and the need for better technology before attempting to open the main burial chamber, many observers believe the real reason is fear of what might be unleashed. Ancient Chinese texts describe elaborate traps and defensive measures designed to kill intruders. But the pattern of deaths and misfortunes associated with even the peripheral excavations suggests that the emperor's protection extends far beyond mechanical devices. Modern attempts to use remote sensing technology to study the tomb's interior have continued to meet with failure. Robotic probes malfunction before reaching their targets. Satellite imagery becomes distorted when focused on the burial site, and computer models of the tomb's structure consistently produce impossible or contradictory results. It's as if the very act of trying to peer into the emperor's final resting place triggers defensive measures that were designed to operate across millennia. The Terracotta Army curse serves as a powerful reminder of the potential consequences of disturbing ancient burial sites. Whether one believes in supernatural explanations or attributes the phenomena to psychological suggestions, environmental factors, or simple coincidence, the pattern of death and misfortune associated with the site is undeniable. The curse has claimed dozens of lives and destroyed countless careers, creating a legacy of fear that continues to influence how the site is studied and presented to the world. As archaeological technology continues to advance, pressure grows to open Emperor Qin Shi Huang's tomb and unlock its secrets. However, the curse of the Terracotta Army stands as a warning that some knowledge may come at too high a price. The ancient emperor, who unified China through force and ruled through fear, seems to have found a way to extend his power beyond death, protecting his eternal rest through supernatural means that modern science cannot fully explain or counteract. The tomb remains sealed, waiting in the darkness beneath the earth, guarded by its army of clay soldiers and protected by forces that have proven deadly to those who would disturb the emperor's eternal slumber. Whether the curse is real or imagined, its effects have been devastatingly real for those who have fallen victim to its influence, ensuring that Emperor Qin Shi Huang's final resting place remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries and most dangerous challenges. Part 10. The Hope Diamond, a curse hiding in plain sight. In the heart of Washington, D.C., behind reinforced glass in the National Museum of Natural History, sits what may be the most famous cursed object in the world, the Hope Diamond, a 45.52 carat deep blue stone, draws millions of visitors each year who come to admire its extraordinary beauty and contemplate its legendary curse. Yet few of these admirers realize that they are staring at an object whose history is written in blood, madness, and death, and whose curse may still be actively claiming victims in ways that the public never hears about. The Hope Diamond story begins in the 17th century in the Collier mine of Golconda, India, where it was originally discovered as a much larger stone weighing approximately 112 carats, known then as the Tavernier Blue, after the French merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who acquired it. The diamond was said to have been stolen from the forehead of a Hindu statue representing the goddess Sita. This act of sacrilege, according to Hindu belief, invoked a powerful curse upon the stone and all who would possess it. Tavernier himself became the curse's first documented victim. After selling the diamond to King Louis XIV of France in 1668, Tavernier used his substantial profits to finance further trading expeditions. However, his luck turned dramatically. His subsequent business ventures failed catastrophically. His ships were lost at sea, and he died in poverty in Russia in 1689, reportedly torn apart by wild dogs while traveling through the wilderness. Some accounts suggest he was murdered by bandits, but local legends insist that he was killed by supernatural forces as punishment for his theft of the sacred stone. King Louis XIV had the Tavernier Blue cut into a smaller, more brilliant stone of about 69 carats, which became known as the French Blue. The Sun King wore the diamond on ceremonial occasions, seemingly immune to its curse for many years. However, the stone's malevolent influence may have been working more subtly than anyone realized. Louis XIV's later years were marked by military defeats economic crisis, and personal tragedies, including the deaths of his son and grandson, which left his great-grandson as his heir. The king himself died a slow, agonizing death from gangrene in 1715, his body literally rotting while he was still alive. The French blue remained in the royal collection through the reigns of Louis XV and Louis XVI. During this period, France experienced increasing political turmoil, economic collapse, and social unrest that would eventually culminate in the French Revolution. While historians attribute these problems to complex social and economic factors, believers in the curse point to the presence of the cursed diamond in the royal treasury as a contributing factor to the monarchy's downfall. Marie Antoinette, wife of Louis XVI, was known to have worn the French blue on several occasions, and her fate became one of the most dramatic examples of the diamond's curse. The queen, who had once lived in unimaginable luxury, was imprisoned during the Revolution, subjected to public humiliation, and ultimately executed by guillotine in 1793. Her husband met the same fate, and their young son died mysteriously in prison, ending the direct Bourbon line of succession. During the chaos of the French Revolution, the French blue was stolen from the royal treasury in 1792, along with other crown jewels. The theft was carried out by a group of revolutionaries who saw the royal treasures as symbols of aristocratic oppression. However, their triumph was short-lived. Most of the thieves met violent deaths within months of the robbery, either executed as criminals or killed in the revolutionary violence that consumed France during this period. The diamond disappeared from historical records for nearly 20 years, presumably passing through the hands of various dealers and collectors in the European underground. When it resurfaced in London in 1812, it had been recut once again, this time into the 45.5 carat stone we know today as the Hope Diamond. The recutting had changed its appearance significantly, but apparently had done nothing to diminish its curse. The stone's new name came from Henry Philip Hope, a wealthy British collector who acquired it sometime around 1830. Hope was a member of a prominent banking family and seemed to have the resources and social position to resist the diamond's malevolent influence. However, his ownership of the cursed stone coincided with a series of personal and financial disasters that destroyed his family's fortune and reputation. Henry Hope died in 1839, just 9 years after acquiring the diamond, and his death marked the beginning of the Hope family's decline. His nephews, who inherited the stone, squandered the family fortune through bad investments and extravagant living. The Hope banking business collapsed, and the family was forced to sell their vast art collection and properties to pay their debts. By the 1890s, the once mighty Hope dynasty had been reduced to near poverty, and they were forced to sell the cursed diamond to settle their creditors. The Hope diamond was purchased in 1901 by Evelyn Walsh McLean, an American socialite and heiress to a mining fortune. McLean was well aware of the stone's reputation, but dismissed the curse as European superstition, confident that her American pragmatism would protect her from supernatural influence. She was tragically wrong. McLean's ownership of the Hope diamond coincided with a series of devastating personal tragedies that destroyed her family and drove her to the brink of madness. McLean's eldest son, Vincent, was killed in a car accident at the age of 9, just a few years after she acquired the diamond. Her daughter, Evelyn, died of a drug overdose at the age of 25. Her husband, Ned McLean, descended into alcoholism and mental illness, eventually requiring institutionalization. The family's newspaper business, the Washington Post, nearly went bankrupt, and McLean herself became increasingly unstable, developing severe paranoia and depression. Most tragically, McLean's son-in-law was involved in the infamous Lindbergh baby kidnapping case, bringing scandal and suspicion upon the family. The stress of these accumulated disasters took a severe toll on McLean's health, and she died in 1947, financially ruined and emotionally broken. Her family was forced to sell the Hope Diamond and other assets to pay their substantial debts. The diamond was acquired by Harry Winston, a prominent New York jeweler who specialized in historically significant gemstones. Winston was keenly aware of the Hope Diamond's reputation, but as a professional dealer rather than a private owner, he seemed to be protected from its worst effects. However, even Winston experienced unusual difficulties during his ownership of the stone. Several of his business associates died unexpectedly. His insurance costs skyrocketed due to mysterious accidents and thefts, and he found it increasingly difficult to find buyers willing to purchase the cursed stone. In 1958, Winston made the decision that would seemingly end the Hope Diamond's reign of terror by donating it to the Smithsonian Institution. The transfer itself was fraught with symbolic significance and practical dangers. Winston sent the diamond through the U.S. Postal Service in a plain brown package, a decision that seemed almost deliberately casual given the stone's value and reputation. However, the postal worker who delivered the package, James Todd, later experienced a series of accidents and health problems that he attributed to his brief contact with the cursed stone. Todd's leg was crushed in a truck accident shortly after delivering the Hope Diamond, and he subsequently suffered a head injury, a heart attack, and the tragic death of his wife in a car accident. While these events might be dismissed as coincidence, Todd himself believed that his brief encounter with the cursed diamond had marked him for a lifetime of misfortune. His story became part of the Hope Diamond's legend, suggesting that even minimal contact with the stone could trigger its malevolent effects. The Smithsonian's acquisition of the Hope Diamond was intended to end its career as a cursed object by placing it in a scientific and educational context. However, the stone's influence seemed to continue even within the museum's walls. Several curators and researchers who worked closely with the diamond reported unusual experiences, including unexplained headaches, vivid nightmares, and a persistent feeling of being watched while in the stone's presence. Dr. George Switzer, the Smithsonian mineralogist who oversaw the Hope Diamond's installation, experienced a series of personal setbacks during his work with the stone. His marriage ended in divorce, his health deteriorated rapidly, and his research career stagnated despite his association with one of the world's most famous gemstones. Switzer himself never publicly attributed his problems to the diamond's curse, but colleagues noted the timing of his difficulties and speculated about supernatural influence. The museum's security staff reported numerous strange incidents involving the Hope Diamond over the years. Alarm systems would malfunction specifically in the gem hall. Surveillance cameras would produce distorted images when focused on the diamond's display case, and guards working the night shift reported hearing unexplained sounds and seeing shadowy figures moving near the stone. Several security guards requested transfers away from the gem hall, citing an overwhelming sense of unease when working near the Hope Diamond. Even visitors to the museum seemed to be affected by the stone's presence in subtle ways. Medical staff at the museum reported an unusually high number of fainting spells and panic attacks in the gem hall. particularly among people viewing the Hope Diamond. Some visitors claimed to experience sudden temperature drops, unexplained nausea, or vivid hallucinations while standing near the display case. While most of these incidents were attributed to the excitement of seeing such a famous artifact, the frequency and consistency of the reports suggested something more than mere tourist enthusiasm. The Hope Diamond's curse appeared to extend beyond individuals to affect institutions and organizations associated with it. The Smithsonian itself experienced a series of budget crises, administrative scandals, and public relations disasters during the decades following the diamond's acquisition. While these problems had complex causes, some observers noted the timing and suggested that the museum had become another victim of the stone's malevolent influence. Documentary filmmakers and journalists who investigated the Hope Diamond's history also seemed to fall victim to its curse. Several prominent researchers suffered career setbacks, health problems, or personal tragedies while working on projects related to the stone. Books about the diamond were plagued by publication delays, legal challenges, and poor sales, despite the subject's inherent fascination. It was as if the stone was actively resisting attempts to tell its story or reveal its secrets. Scientific studies of the Hope Diamond have revealed some unusual properties that might contribute to its psychological effects on viewers. The stone exhibits a rare phenomenon called phosphorescence, glowing with a reddish light when exposed to ultraviolet radiation, and continuing to emit this glow for several minutes after the UV source is removed. This otherworldly property, combined with the diamond's deep blue color and perfect clarity, creates an almost hypnotic effect that could potentially trigger psychological responses in susceptible individuals. The diamond's unique coloration is caused by trace amounts of boron in its crystal structure, a rare occurrence that gives it its distinctive blue hue. Some researchers have speculated that this unusual composition might generate subtle electromagnetic fields that could affect human brain chemistry, potentially explaining the reports of headaches, nausea, and other physical symptoms experienced by people in the stone's presence. However, believers in the curse argue that scientific explanations cannot account for the specific pattern of tragedies that have followed the Hope Diamond throughout its history. The deaths, bankruptcies, and personal disasters associated with the stone span centuries and continents, affecting people of different cultures, social classes, and belief systems. The consistency of these events, they argue, suggests a supernatural force that transcends natural phenomena. The Hope Diamond's current status as a museum piece has not ended speculation about its curse. In recent years, several high-profile thefts and security breaches at the Smithsonian have focused attention on the gem haul, leading some to wonder whether the stone is somehow attracting criminal activity. Additionally, the museum's decision to occasionally loan the diamond for special exhibitions has resulted in a series of mishaps and accidents that have reinforced its reputation as a cursed object. During a 2005 loan to the Harry Winston Gallery in New York, the Hope Diamond's transport was delayed by mechanical problems with the armored vehicle, and the gallery experienced a power outage on the day of the diamond's arrival. Similar problems have occurred during other loan arrangements, suggesting that the stone's malevolent influence travels with it wherever it goes. The Hope Diamond's curse continues to fascinate and terrify people around the world, representing humanity's complex relationship with beauty, wealth, and the unknown. Whether one believes in supernatural explanations or attributes the stone's reputation to coincidence and psychological suggestion, its history remains one of the most compelling examples of how objects can acquire power through association with human fears and desires. Today, as millions of visitors file past the Hope Diamond's display case each year, they are witnessing more than just a remarkable gemstone. They are confronting a tangible link to centuries of human ambition, greed, and tragedy. A beautiful object that serves as a reminder of the potential price of possessing something too precious for mortal hands to hold safely. The curse may be real, or it may be an elaborate fiction, but its effects on human history have been undeniably profound, making the Hope Diamond one of the most powerful and feared objects in the world. The stone continues to rest behind its protective glass, beautiful and serene, while its dark history whispers warnings to those who would covet its perfection. Whether it will claim future victims remains to be seen, but its legend ensures that the Hope Diamond will continue to inspire both wonder and terror for generations to come. A cursed treasure hiding in plain sight in the heart of America's capital. Thanks for watching No Sleep Historian. Like and subscribe for more history they wanted you to forget. Until next time, sleep tight if you still can.